Welcome, I'm Jon Caldara, president of the Independence Institute and your devil's advocate on your ballot this fall. Whether you get it in the mail or you get it in somebody else's mailbox, they'll be all over the place like coupons. Will be issue AA or Prop AA as in Alcoholics Anonymous, but it's actually for weed. And to talk about that and the taxes from NORML, and NORML stands for
National Organization for Reform of Marijuana Laws.
Sean McAllister, thank you for having us.
Thank you for having me.
And Joe Megyesy from
the Committee for Responsible Regulation, the Yes on Prop AA campaign.
Responsible regulation. What bureaucrat came up with that? Boy, I want to get behind that one. All right. So let me see if I understand the basics here. Colorado passed Amendment 64, putting something in our Constitution, making it legal to have up to an ounce of recreational marijuana. Also, you can give it away. You don't have, as long as there's no sales. But it also said that there will be recreational sales. The legislature had, and let me see if I got this right, one session to come up with a bunch of regulations. They did that at the 19th hour. That's a bad analogy, the 11th hour. And now there's a tax increase to fund all those things that they did. So we're not having an election on pot, we're having an election on taxing pot. Do I have that right?
That's right.
All right. What does the proposal do?
So within Amendment 64, there's a provision that they would direct the state legislature to enact an excise tax on the wholesale distribution of marijuana. So that's a marijuana as it leaves a cultivation facility and goes to either a factory or to a retail shop for sale. So that was in the amendment.
In other words, I have the Caldara pot plantation going on, and I'm going to bring it over to retailers who are going to then sell it. There'd be a 10% tax going.
It's a 15% tax, and it could either go to a retail or to a factory to be made into oils or a number of other concentrates or goods.
So from the plantation to wherever it is, 15% excise tax.
That's right.
And then what happens when the guy goes into the shop to buy it?
Well, so let's go. We're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit. That part was in the actual amendment that passed last year. It was directing the legislature to enact this excise tax. And the first $40 million of that excise tax will go to public school capital construction, to the BEST fund, which stands for Building Excellent Schools Today.
See this? Are you kidding me? So this is like the Read to Achieve program getting money from cigarette sales. So if I want to show my support for government schools, I'm going to be toking up in front of them and saying, doing this for you kids. So part of this excise tax goes to schools. Building construction for schools. So
when the legislature was tasked with implementing Amendment 64 last year, they decided since that first $40 million of that excise tax was going to that BEST fund, it was all earmarked for that there was not going to be any extra money for regulatory oversight or enforcement. So they were looking at other possible revenue streams for regulatory oversight. And they decided to come up with a special sales tax that they would also include on the ballot because, of course, under our Tabor laws, we have to vote separately.
Because I thought 64 said they could only raise taxes 15%, but this is a whole lot more than that, right?
Well, that's where the opposition gets a little disappointed. We can jump in.
Yeah, hold on a second. Yeah. Go ahead and give us just the outline. So if you vote yes, there's a 15% excise tax from the guy who's building it or growing it.
Plus a 10% sales tax, which the consumer will pay when they're buying marijuana at a shop. And
you said 10%?
10%, with a ceiling of 15%. It gives the legislature the ability to go up to 15%. And all that money will be dedicated to regulatory oversight and enforcement.
All right. My arithmetic's a little shady, but you're talking about a 25% tax on marijuana. Would that be the right way to? That's sooner or later the person who buys.
It's hard to calculate, but I guess effectively yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And then localities still can add their own sales tax to it as well.
That's right.
And beyond that, the regular sales tax that's on anything you sell. What's the sales tax?
2.9%.
That's 2.9% for the state, but the municipal is
3.2 to 3.8. Denver is 3.62.
Right. Let's round it up to 8% is what usual sales tax is when you go out someplace. Yes. So under this, not only would you buy pot, you have the 8% tax, then there'd be the 30% tax from this, plus your localities could put even more tax on top of it if they wish.
That's right.
All right.
So I'm not a genius with numbers, but that sounds like over 40% taxation. And that just concerns marijuana consumers. They look at that and say, wow, I thought we were voting to treat marijuana like alcohol, and I don't think alcohol pays 40% taxes.
Actually, I wouldn't be surprised if it does between all the regulatory costs and sin taxes left,
Well,
right,
again,
and otherwise.
I'm not great with numbers, but we've checked, and what alcohol does is pays about 60 cents per liter. It's hard to equate how many liters of alcohol equate to a bag of marijuana, but NORML, again, the National Organization for Reform of Marijuana Laws, we believe it basically is 2 to 3 times more what people pay for alcohol. And Joe's absolutely right. First of all, we should all acknowledge that we were partners in the sense of everybody supporting Amendment 64. Very proud of Colorado for taking this big step. But I think this reaction to it by adding so many extra taxes is sort of the old thinking about marijuana being a sin and it needs to pay more than its fair share. And I think it does sort of betray the will of the voters who want it treated like alcohol.
Both of you guys worked side by side to pass Amendment 64, and now you're on opposite sides of this. Is it fair for me to say that those people who lost 64, those people who voted against it and didn't want it, are going to be happy to tax it that high? I mean, that's the coalition that's working on your side and funding your side are mostly anti-pot folks, aren't they?
No. It's not. Our main funders are actually coming from a group of, most of them are business owners, marijuana business owners, who view this as a path to further legitimacy. It's sort of a unique situation that we're in. It's kind of bizarre, a world that you see an industry stepping up to fund a campaign to tax themselves, but I think that's how important they feel it is. And there's some other concerned people or interested parties that have also stepped up to fund this campaign, but it's certainly not prohibitionists at all.
But there are prohibitionists who are supporting this campaign. Would I be right?
I have no idea.
All right.
Not officially.
To be fair to Joe, I think there's prohibitionists who also oppose the campaign in hopes that submarining the initiative would somehow hurt marijuana regulation. But, NORML's core...
But it's already in the Constitution.
Yes.
If this loses, that doesn't come out of the Constitution.
Yeah, but if it loses, then the ability for individuals to grow marijuana on themselves in their basement, 6 plants, still exists. And so if there's no regulatory structure that's funded and that collapses and the state is not able to allow shops and cultivation facilities to open up, then you're going to give incentive to individuals to grow out of their basements.
If I were to boil this down, you got two sides of the pro-pot coalition here. Both of you want pot to be normalized, to be accepted, to have a permanent marketplace here, an illegal marketplace. If I understand what you're saying, yeah, but the tax here is so much, and I'm jumping ahead, that this could drive transactions underground. If it's a 40% tax on pot, and I don't know what,
Yes.
I'm not a consumer, so I have no idea what it costs. So what's an ounce of pot go for?
$200 at the medical, $220, $250
For an ounce?
maybe. Yes, for
All
an
right.
ounce. That's almost half, by the way, the price of the black market. So there is some indication that the regulated market does outcompete the black market. But if these taxes become too high, that is a concern. That's one of the concerns about the black
let me
market.
just jump on this. So for that, let's say it's $200.
Yeah.
This being almost, this could bring it up to $300.
Mm-hmm.
You are worried that, well, then people just grow it and sell it and keep it underground, therefore making it dangerous to keep this law in effect. You're saying the opposite, which is, no, if we have this taxation scheme that goes forward, it normalizes it. It's like all the other things like alcohol and cigarettes, and therefore it's gonna have a larger standing. Do I have that about right?
That's about right. And I think the federal government just weeks ago issued a statement, finally a long-awaited statement, how they're going to look at states that are legalizing marijuana. And Deputy Attorney General James Cole said in this memo that he listed a list of criteria of what it would take for the federal government not to interfere in states that are legalizing marijuana. And one of the things he outlined was states need to demonstrate an ability to adequately fund regulatory enforcement.
I think first let me say the thing that drives the black market most are these local bans. There's always been marijuana in Colorado Springs. The fact that Colorado Springs said yes, it's always been there for 50 years.
There's no pot in marijuana.
Even soldiers.
There's no pot in Colorado Springs.
Yes.
There are no gays in Colorado Springs.
Right,
It's
exactly.
Colorado Springs.
Right. So that we just want to say that's one of the prime drivers of the black market. But I think it does assist it. And it's going to help the black market if the taxes are too high. So that is definitely one of the big problems. But it's regular sales taxes that could fund all this regulation that Joe's talking about. We don't need an extra 10%. The takeaway here is the legislature took what we said in November, a 15% excise tax, and they tacked on an extra 10% because they could. And that's what happened here is the voters agreed to 15%. They didn't agree to the extra 10. And by the way, it can go to 15. So they didn't agree to that either. And that's the only reason we object is that these are, two things stuck together that should have been separate. The legislature had a chance to just offer us what we voted for in November, the 15% excise tax. Instead, they tacked these together. It's like welding a Pinto to a Ferrari or to a nice car because, the bottom line is they could have kept these separate, but the legislature has put proponents in the position of having to oppose this tax because, we did support part of it, but we do not want another 15% on marijuana consumers. That's 2 to 3 times more than alcohol.
All right, so right now there is going to be a tax on it. Even if this thing fails, the state's still going to get 2.9% sales tax revenue on everyone that it gets. Localities will get anything above that, plus they can add even more to it. So those localities, if they want to say we need more money to regulate it, and they put 5% on top of it, still there's going to be, the 8% you regularly pay, part of that is state, and then local, and then RTD district, and then all these other little tax districts. Why do you need more than that in order to regulate it properly?
Because we're dealing with a substance here that is illegal in every other state except one in the United States. And it's illegal in every state that borders Colorado. And the federal government in that same memo also said one of the things that they are going to be looking at very closely is making sure that legal marijuana does not flow outside of Colorado's borders into our neighboring states. And so to deal with regulating this product like that, we're going to need some extra funds to put towards that to ensure that doesn't happen.
And how are they going to stop that? I mean, I saw the great Prohibition movies. I saw Elliot Ness. I got it all. But pot takes up a lot smaller place. I could see people making their runs here, just as my friends are going to run up to Wyoming to get magazines that hold more than 15 rounds. People from Wyoming are going to drive down here, buy from different shops, go back up there. What kind of enforcement is going to be able to stop that?
I think what they're going to be looking at is like a systematic diversion. So that's going to be a diversion of marijuana happening at a high level of the manufacturing. These are going to be the cultivators themselves that are unable to unload their product on the legitimate marketplace, and so they're loading it up in duffel bags.
So in other words, it's you go. I call it the plantation. Go back to the plantation. Make sure that guy is only selling to his.
But John, let me just tell you. First of all, there hasn't been a lot of indication that's happened in 3 years of regulated medical marijuana. There've been a couple examples. But you just hit the nail on the head. Why isn't there enough money in the regular sales tax? We know from the Blue Book projections that the regular sales tax between state and local governments will raise $12 million for the state, $13 million for locals. And right now the budget of the entire Marijuana Enforcement Division, the agency that oversees these businesses, is $5 million. You've got $12 million coming from regular sales tax. And let me say one other important thing. Again, like
let me put that in English.
Yes.
If this fails,
yes,
the state and local, they're still getting $12 million for enforcement that they can use for enforcement because you're selling more stuff. And what they're spending on now, and they have been spending with medical marijuana, is less than half that.
They could double their budget with regular sales tax and do this rigorous enforcement he's talking about. And by the way, every alcohol shop in the state is regulated by an agency with a budget of $2 million. Thousands of alcohol stores. So, this is rewarding failure of the state government. You've heard these stories about this agency that regulates marijuana buying more cars than having employees, having 3 directors in 4 years. This is a failure of leadership of Governor Hickenlooper and his administration by not appointing good people to these positions that will give us a strong agency that runs on a good budget, because what they want to reward failure and give them 2x, 4 times the budget.
You don't disagree with what Joe's saying about having a need for strong regulation, making sure that the feds have no reason to believe that it's seeping out of the state in any large way.
Exactly.
And so you want that.
You're
just saying
with the
that
regular sales tax.
You can say you can do it just with normal sales tax that we pay on every cup of coffee and every sweater we buy.
This is exactly what every other industry goes through.
Let me get your response to that. Yeah. Why would it take more if we're spending $5 million now?
As you mentioned, Sean and I have worked together in this struggle to legalize marijuana. I mean, Sean admittedly has worked on much longer than I have, and some of the biggest foes are those within governments that are opposing us: local, state government, federal government. And I think the best way to get them on our side is demonstrate how marijuana can provide real value to their system and their organizations. And I think there's no better way to do that than.
So you're just paying off the bureaucrats. Do you want to get government agencies addicted to cash flow so that they need that extra revenue, and therefore they're never going to criminalize it again because they're addicted not to pot but to money?
Well, it's interesting. If you look at alcohol prohibition, they could not move forward with alcohol prohibition. They were trying very hard at the temperance movement to move ahead, but they couldn't because there was a lot of revenue streams that were depending on alcohol taxes. So they got there. But they had to pass
the saddest time in American history, prohibition.
But they had to pass the federal income tax first. And after they passed the federal income tax is when they enacted prohibition. They had to start that other revenue stream first before they would prohibit alcohol and outlaw alcohol use.
So I'm hearing that you're buying off government. You're going to give them enough cash that they're going to be happy, particularly in tight times. They're going to be happy to have this cash flow, and none of them are going to say let's do it in.
I mean, look at the efforts we had.
So you're not disagreeing with me?
At the end of the session, Senate President John Morse led an effort to try to repeal Amendment 64 at the 19th hour. The struggle is not over. Just because 55% of Colorado voters approved Amendment 64 and the legalization of marijuana, it doesn't mean that struggle is over. I mean,
all right. So what I'm hearing here is, yes, John, you're right. We're gonna pay our way to the table so government gets addicted to our cash flow, and that way we're gonna stick around. And that's not bad logic, is it?
Well, I mean, let me defend him to a certain degree that part of what the campaign is doing, and as he said earlier, we are setting an example for the nation and even for the world. And so I'm very sympathetic, and I think voters should consider this concern that Joe has expressed about, well, maybe the feds get more interested if we don't have enough tax money, but exactly what you said is what's happening, is that they want to be able to show we can raise hundreds of millions of dollars from this, and I think we can over the long term. But why are we starting at the highest level of the excise tax? Why are we starting by basically doubling that tax? I think it's more responsible. Basically, I think as a libertarian principle, you should pay as little tax as you can, and this thing should pay its way. It's going to do more than pay its way, and it is a windfall. That's why I said it's a failure of leadership, because these politicians did step in and see it as a windfall. And I think it doesn't need to be a cash cow right away. Let's see how it goes, and we can work on it over time.
So John Morse, president of the Senate, wanted to repeal 64 and send it back to the people.
Essentially, yes.
What happened to John Morse?
Yeah,
he was in the news for something. I can't remember. Anyway, well, let me prognosticate. Prognosticate? Yeah, that's close enough. Here's what's going to happen. You are going to be treated just like cigarettes, and you guys are going to get screwed in taxes. This is the way it works, and it's because you are a minority.
That's right.
This is basic cost theory. This is you are going to be a small minority, and therefore it's easy to raise taxes on you. The same reason why this silly income tax increase will go down in flames is the same reason that you guys you're going to be able to win this, is that the only taxes that are easy to pass are when you're taxing a minority. That's why cigarette taxes fly through, because only 20% of us smoke. And hotel taxes and on hotel rooms, well, we don't pay that. Rental cars, we'll tax those because there's somebody out. And potheads, since I'm not one, I don't smoke, I don't care, so it's easy. I have no play in this. That's what's going to happen.
Well, we are a permanent minority. The statistics are that 15% of adults regularly use marijuana. That's about 15%. So that regular use, monthly kind of thing. So that's 500,000 to 600,000 Coloradans. Then you got 30 million visitors coming. But, I think we are underplaying our majority. I mean, we got not a slim majority, but a 55% majority. More votes than Barack Obama, more votes than Governor Hickenlooper, more votes than all these candidates that are out there now arguing to, ramp up.
Help me with that one. All right, because if there was one big surprise that I found, it was the passage of 64 by that margin. I thought it would be tight. I thought it would lose, but in a tight loss, and instead, you guys blew it out. What made that difference? Was it the presidential vote that brought out more Obama supporters, which were more sympathetic? What made the difference?
I think it's
Politically.
I think
Not
it's
ideologically, politically.
No, I know. I think it's that Coloradans lived with medical marijuana, a proliferation of medical marijuana for the last 2 or 3 years, and they saw that, and they saw that the sky was not falling, that it was okay. They heard stories that there was revenue being generated, jobs being created, and they said, "What's the big deal?" And let's just legalize it. I think that's what happened.
And I think it's a confluence of many cultural trends, demographic trends. But you look at the example of gay rights over the last 20 years, gay rights and marijuana rights have seen a similar amazing uptick in support. And I actually attribute some of it to social networks and the ability to express support for things like marijuana legalization on a Facebook page with 1,000 or 500 friends. And that just normalizing the issue, plus what Joe said, absolutely, medical marijuana showing the sky didn't fall. And people said, why do we keep doing this? And I do agree they wanted some tax dollars for this. All NORML is arguing is, let's not go to the max right away. Let's be reasonable.
Was it 2006 that there was a proposition to legalize pot? And it got killed.
No,
60 to 40.
No, 41 to 59. That's
41.
One in 10 votes changes, we would have won. Think about that. If you have one person change their mind.
It got killed. If that same proposal, written the way it was, which was basically just straight, it's now decriminalized, would that have passed last year?
No.
Why do you say no?
Well, I agree with Joe that a system of regulation is what the public wanted, and that's what's different about 2006. They didn't just want to blow the doors open, say it's legal. They wanted to know it was going to be tightly regulated under cameras. And so that's why under cameras, there's going to be camera video surveillance of these stores. There's going to be ID checks. I mean, these are critical components of responsible distribution of marijuana. Nobody wants it to go to kids, but I guess, again, we're just down to this small disagreement about how high should the tax be, because we did do the right thing by responsibly regulating it, and now it's just a question
We've got about 5 minutes left. Let me talk about some peripheral issues. You say that medical marijuana has worked. There is seepage, all right? There are guys coming in, tourists who are getting stoned, and it's also getting to kids. It's easier for kids to get pot, I think, than it is to get booze. You say no.
Well, first of all, what you just said was true under Prohibition, that kids reported it was easier to get marijuana than alcohol. And one of the arguments was because with alcohol, they at least have to have somebody with an ID to get that. And so the evidence in the last 5 years since medical marijuana came into existence is that teen use in marijuana has actually trickled down below the national average. So, proponents like Joe...
With medical marijuana.
With medical marijuana.
That's true in Colorado.
Yeah, there's certainly anecdotal examples of kids who got it from their parents and who are being irresponsible. But again, a libertarian value, we want to hold the wrongdoers responsible. Don't punish the majority if one dad or mom does something stupid or one 21-year-old. We don't do that with alcohol, and every objective measure marijuana is less harmful. We should treat it the same way.
You agree?
I agree.
Let me talk about driving under the influence, and that's been something that's been tough to figure out because, well, you haven't tested for it. We don't have the data because it's hard to test something that's illegal. I'm growing more aware that there's between booze, which we have a tight system for, riding while under the influence of marijuana, we're trying to put together a system, and we'll see if it works. But there's also, when you put those two drugs together, you can have an amplifying effect. Is there any way to measure that yet?
Yeah, I actually served as the DUID co-chair of the Governor's Commission on this for a couple of years, and I've spent ad nauseum hours on it. But, the bottom line is there's not an easy test.
Does that mean you got drunk and
high
and stoned at the same time?
No, you're right. The combinatory effect of alcohol and marijuana is the most dangerous thing, and we need to do public education campaigns. And Joe, we are working with the Department of Transportation and the Medical Marijuana Industry Group to do a education campaign on this. But we need to focus on those people who are at high risk for that. That's young people who aren't making smart decisions, or chronic, persistent people that drink and use marijuana. That's just like with our alcohol laws. It's 10% of the people that cause 90% of the problem. And we are moving towards that, but we don't have an easy test right now, like a swab in your mouth, to tell us how high you are. We need a blood test right now, so that takes a while to get results. But there's no roadside easy test for officers right now.
Let's work on the assumption, and I know you don't want this to happen, but since you're going to be taxing a political minority, I think this is going to be an easy tax, even though I think it is obscenely high. This is a tax increase I could actually get behind but I think it's so high it might drive customers underground, and I think that could defeat the purpose. But assuming that it passes, what happens on January 1st? When will people see the Walmarts of pot pop open? What's it going to look like?
Well, if all the local governments are on track as they are right now, you'll see the ones that have agreed to allow commercial marijuana, adult use marijuana, come online on January 2nd, I believe, because most of the agencies will be closed on the 1st. It'll actually be the 2nd. So you'll see, NORML marijuana stores in Denver, Boulder, and a number of other cities across the state. A number of towns across the state, and you'll be able to walk in and a government issue ID that proves you're 21 or older, and be able to buy up to an ounce.
Up to an ounce. And when you have that ounce, you can give it away.
That's right.
You cannot sell it, though.
That's right. You cannot sell it. Right.
And out-of-state people can only buy a quarter ounce at the stores. I think the intent there was to try to prohibit people from coming and getting a large amount in an easy way. But I think it will be a new day in Colorado. Public use is still illegal, despite what some other advocates in this movement seem to think.
You can't walk around on the sidewalk smoking.
Right. You can't smoke pot at a Rockies game. We know that for sure. So.
We find that out. All right, a few seconds left. Tell us, half a minute or so, why should we vote yes on this?
Proposition AA is simply fulfilling a commitment to Colorado voters when they approved Amendment 64. 55% of them approved Amendment 64, that marijuana would be taxed and pay for its own regulatory oversight. And as you said, this is a tax on marijuana users. If you don't use marijuana, you don't pay.
Well, I mean, my only complaint is that we had a campaign based on hopes, and now we're governing based on fears, and we're implementing a tax based on this idea that marijuana is like plutonium. We can regulate marijuana like alcohol. That's what voters said, and like alcohol means a smaller percentage tax.
Remember, it's always fun to tax minorities. I'm Jon Caldara. Thank you. Thank you. Listen for me on KHOW Radio. That's 6:30 on your AM dial. Tell a friend. We'll see you next week.